Hi, happy Wednesday to you. I'm sitting up here in the sanctuary at Hotchkiss United Methodist Church, and I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts for you on this Wednesday. Our scripture reading for last Sunday was from the Gospel of John, and it was the story of Jesus appearing to the disciples, first without Thomas present, and then later with Thomas present. And as I mentioned in a previous video on Monday, I love this story. It's one of my most favorite passages in all of Scripture, and it's a deeply textured and layered story that teaches us about so many aspects of our Christian faith. It tells us something about Jesus. It tells us something about the nature of resurrection. It tells us something about what it means to be part of a Christian community. So Monday, I talked a little bit about how I understood these stories to tell us something about Jesus. And today, I want to just share what I think the story from the Gospel of John. It's in chapter 20. I'll put a link to the passage in the comments here in a minute. But what this tells us about the nature of resurrection. And the first thing is that it says to me is that resurrection is about a transformation. If we read this account of Jesus appearing to the disciples, we see that something has changed about Jesus. He's suddenly able to pass through locked doors. He's able to pass through walls. There's something different, and it's almost like a spiritual aspect to him. We get in the accounts in John and in the other Gospels, these places where people encounter the risen Christ, and yet they don't recognize him. And so we can see that there's something different or changed about the resurrected Jesus. And so at its very root, this idea of resurrection, this idea of being raised from the grave, of being raised to new life, is about a transformation, a change in who we are and how we are in the world. But it's not just about change, because there's also a sense of continuity that takes place in resurrection. Right? So there are moments of recognition where people finally come to recognize that Jesus is there in their midst. But there's also this beautiful encounter where the risen Jesus appears to the disciples and Thomas, who wasn't there at the first appearance, and says, I'm not going to believe it unless I place my hands in the wounds in Jesus' hand and in his side. And Jesus shows up among the disciples and says to Thomas, here, put your hands right here where you said you needed to place them in order to believe. And so it's interesting that we notice that even though resurrection is about transformation, there's some sort of continuity with the life that we have lived. Jesus still bears the marks of his ministry, of his sacrifice of love that he made on behalf of others. And so and not everything changes. We still carry some semblance of who we were. And that brings me to the third point that I love about this, is that we proclaim the resurrection of the body, right? It's in our Apostles' Creed. It's one of the cornerstones of the Christian faith. I believe in the resurrection of the body. And we see that in Jesus, that even though there's some sort of new transformation taking place in Jesus, that he has been raised in the flesh. That he has a flesh and bones body, that this is an enfleshed, embodied resurrection. This is so important to me because it tells us something about our faith that is absolutely crucial. If we go back to the very beginning of the Old Testament in the book of Genesis, we see God creating everything that is, all of creation. And God looks on it and says, wow, this is good. And that includes our human bodies. And I think when we see Jesus resurrected in the body, it's a reminder of the goodness of bodies, the goodness of creation, the goodness of our flesh and bones existence. If it didn't matter, then God wouldn't take the time to redeem it. Jesus wasn't resurrected as a ghost or as a spirit. He didn't evolve into an angel. He was raised in the body because bodies matter to God. and bodies are worth redeeming. And I think about what that means for us. And I think, why do churches have ministries where we try to run food pantries that feed people? Why do we have ministries where we run thrift stores so that people can have access to inexpensive clothing or household items? Why do we have ministries of Alcoholics Anonymous where we help people improve their physical and mental and social health? Because we, at a root of who we are, believe that bodies matter. For us in this time of living with the coronavirus and wondering what we do with COVID-19 outbreaks, it's important for us to remember that we value bodies, and we value this idea of health and safety, because we know that God's creation is good. And so we practice social distancing, or we wear a mask when we're in groups and public places. We close our places of worship for a time, because that is an act of saying we believe in the goodness of creation and in the bodies and in the importance of health. And so this day, I ask you to just think about this gift and promise of resurrection that tells us that we will be changed, and yet we will still carry some continuity with who we are today. And that God redeems bodies, but God redeems bodies because God believes that the bodies and physical creation are good and worth caring for and worth protecting. And so today I pray that you ask God for help and hope and transformation, that you think about what marks you carry that define who you are as a person and as a person of faith, and that you take steps to care for not only your body and the bodies of your family, but for all of creation and for others as well. I pray that you are well, that you are safe, and that you are living in that resurrection hope today and always. God bless you, and God be with you until we see each other face to face. Amen.